you took the time recently to write a very interesting piece about the three men who were recently convicted of offenses surrounding the Coutts protest. They were convicted of mischief over $5,000 for serving as liaisons between protesters and police. You want to talk about that piece and why this drew your interest, why you thought it was important to talk about it publicly?
Yeah, so this is the Coutts 3, which are different from the
Yes.
Coutts 4. So I wrote it because I mean I've been writing about these issues ever since the Freedom Convoy in February
Right.
2022. So I wrote it partly because I wanted to add on this new development, and I think that it's concerning because the civil disobedience has happened in Canada, since the inception of the nation.
Hmm.
And the way
Even
we've
before, even before that, if you think of, for example, the 1838 rebellions in Upper and Lower Canada, if you know your Canadian history, so yeah, we have had a history of civil disobedience in Canada, haven't we? Yeah, so that's a good point. Sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to chime in there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, exactly. There's lots of history of doing that, and so there's a
Hmm.
whole different approach. And people understand if you blockade a private logging company's road, there will be consequences at some point. And Marco van Hugenbos was on an interview with Trish Wood on her podcast, saying he understands
Right,
that
I saw this. Hmm.
if you block a highway at some point, someone's going to say you've got to stop doing this.
Hmm.
And yet, in early January 2020, up until mid March of 2020, there were protesters who blocked national rail, passenger and freight service on CNCP, Highway 6 in Ontario, and chock a block of ferry terminals out in the West Coast. And throughout all of that, Prime Minister Trudeau said, "Well, we have to have dialogue."
Hmm.
And so it seems that if a person was to go and protest something, which then involves doing something which is illegal, like blocking a road or a rail service or a ferry service, you can't know for sure what the government is going to do about that, except I suppose if you think the government will tolerate your protest, or if they don't like your protest. If it
Hmm.
pleases them, that's fine. If it doesn't please them, then you're going to be in their crosshairs.
Yeah, this is an excellent point because if you take, for example, the pro-Palestinian protests that we've seen in Canada and the United States and elsewhere, this is a very good example. I was looking recently at what's happening at Columbia University near New York. And what's peculiar about that is of course, these people who ostensibly are supportive of a free Palestine, a state of Palestine, they're there, they're camped out. But Ray, they all seem to have the same tents. Like there's a tent, there's sort of a tent community there, but they all have seemed to have bought the same tents. And these protests look very much like the BLM protests that occurred in 2020, which just happened to coincide with another presidential election. And the protests in Canada seem to have the same flavor. There's almost a corporatist flavor to these protests in terms of the signs and the level of organization. It doesn't look anything like the Freedom Convoy or what happened at Coutts. And so this seems to feed, again, talking about conspiracy theories, it sort of invites the speculation that people like George Soros and others are again behind this. This is almost a revivification of the BLM protests that we saw in 2020. What are your thoughts in that regard?
I think that every once in a while, there's a story in the news about the RCMP being involved in skullduggery. Back in
Yes.
2007, was it? There was an economic summit of the G7 or G20, I forget which, and there were protesters regarding global interests, and the most aggressive of the protesters got arrested, and lo and behold, they all had police issued police boots, and they were agent provocateurs. So
Right.
so you've got that. We had a situation in 2013. in Victoria, where a provincial parliament, there was apparently, allegedly, a plot to blow up part of the legislative buildings, and then it turned out that the two ne'er do well, uh, people on welfare with not an awful lot of skills had been coached by a number of RCMP officers, and that as many as 240 RCMP officers were involved in this file to
Mm.
nudge along the plot.
Shocking. That's
You know,
shocking. Yeah.
and the judge in British Columbia said in 2018 that there are enough actual criminal activities going on that the RCMP should be involved in investigating, and that they shouldn't be
Mm.
involved in hatching plots.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I follow your X page closely, Ray, and you posted something recently that caught my eye, and I wanted to ask you about it. You wrote, you were talking about the World Health Organization treaty that's coming up, the pandemic treaty. And you wrote that once upon a time, the World Health Organization was funded by nations. Now it is in the hands of mostly private interests with an agenda. Of course, this is in the context of both Canada and the United States signing on to this treaty. And now, recently, there are rumblings, serious rumblings, that the Biden administration is about to declare a climate emergency. And of course, under that pandemic treaty, a climate emergency would be considered a health emergency. And this would cause, again, worldwide lockdowns, much like what we saw with COVID, and perhaps worse. So you've been following this WHO pandemic treaty. What is it about this that you find very concerning?
Yes, I think it's in Article 13 of the treaty that talks about how governments, like if the World Health Organization declares a world pandemic, then all of the mechanisms, all of the foot soldiers proceed from the World Health Organization. That no nation that signs on to the treaty would be making their own calls regarding what they think they need to do within their own
Hmm.
borders. And
Hmm.
so I read something quite recently that said that maybe the WHO has had to take Article 13 out, but I can't. It's just a hopeful report, but I don't know if that's the case. But I think that with it, clearly Bill Gates Foundation has been involved in funding, whatever it is, 70, 80%
Hmm.
of the WHO, which is, I'm not somebody who was spending much time wondering about the budget of the World Health Organization over these decades. I would just assume that it was simply an international body with nations contributing funds. So it's quite a surprise to me to find out that there are private interests, powerful private interests that want to drive agendas regarding vaccines and other things.
Hmm. Well, it certainly feeds the conspiracy theories about, a global cabal, an elite wanting to take over absolutely everything. But if you were planning to do that, it seems that the COVID-19 pandemic proved that this would be that a health emergency would be an effective mechanism. So it certainly is cause for concern, particularly when you see the continuing encroachment upon individual rights and freedoms that we're experiencing in Canada today. And in that regard, I want to ask you about something called Bill 367, which would which is has been brought into the House of Commons by the Bloc Québécois. And currently, there's an exemption in the criminal code for those who quote from Scripture and talk in this context. But it seems that this new bill would remove that exemption, so that if someone were quoting from the Apostle Paul's writing about traditional marriage, in discussing, for example, gay marriage, that would become in Canada hate speech and criminal conduct punishable by imprisonment. Is this of concern to you?
Yes, I mean, how far will this go? I mean, there are some small Protestant denominations where, at least in the past, they have followed the injunction that women shall all wear hats on their heads when they're in church. I mean,
Hmm.
would they see that as hate speech? I think that when you end up having non-elected people in positions of power making decisions about what they think is hateful, that's very concerning because
Hmm.
uh, there can be all kinds of reasons why somebody might find it convenient to have this or that person silenced or put behind bars in order to get to where they get the brass ring they're reaching for.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
and if we, I want to add too that this is all part of a kind of catastrophizing scenario where we are forever, as a general public, caught or meant to be running around after the Chicken Littles uh, of Ottawa tell us the sky is falling.
Hmm.
Regarding climate change, regarding all numbers of things, or to scare us with strategies of tension
Hmm.
that get us on edge, so that every day is like, we're waiting for the next shoe to drop.
Hmm. There's no question that we're being terrorized. We're being made to fear and be anxious. So I'm curious, how is your own experience? Because you obviously have a very deep Christian education. How has that influenced your writing during the course of your career?
Well, I think it's influenced my writing. I guess I have to be. When I write something, I have to be honest.
Right.
That's one of the things.
Hopefully, that would be refreshing.
The truth will set you free, and I know that we all see through a glass darkly. I choose to write articles when it seems that not many other people are writing articles about the topic. I
Hmm. Hmm.
and really, if we were living in a more normal media environment from the good old days, probably there would be mainstream media reporters writing the stories I've been writing the last few years, and I could just enjoy being retired. But it seems that that there's a gap that needs to be filled, and I'm one of the independent citizen journalists that are taking up the slack.
You're being called to do it.